My name is Dr. Renlexander, but I changed my name half a lifetime ago. It was originally Gary Ross Sargent. And this video is about my journey in names, how I came to change my name, and how I became interested in this whole question of the psychological impact of names and their origin. I was having a breathwork session. Now, this is an accelerated breathing technique, and I'm not going to explain all the implications of that here, but I was in Tasmania, southern island off the mainland of Australia, and was a 3-week hyper-intensive, and I'm having a breathing session, and I hear myself saying, I'm not going to be Gary, I'm not going to carry the family, I'm not going to be Gary, I'm not going to carry the family, I'm not going to be Gary, I'm not going to carry the family, I'm not going to be Gary, I'm not going to carry the family, on and on. Now, this wasn't a conscious thought. I heard myself saying this. Really weird. Now, to give you an idea, I was called Gary Ross Sargent. Those names were suggested by my father. I was obviously the last child. My mother was 40. She'd only had one previous child when she was about 35. My brother, Bruce, and because he was left too long in the birth process and not cesarean soon enough, he ended up with epilepsy and with what is now called cerebral palsy, but when I was growing up was called spasticity in the right side. So I was the last child. My father was the most allergic person to responsibility I have ever met in my life, and he called me Gary Ross Sargent. And in fact, sometimes he would actually call me Gary Cross Sargent. Carry the cross of the Sargent family. Now, at the time I had this session and heard myself saying, I'm not going to be Gary, I'm not going to carry the family, I'm not going to be, etc. My brother, of course, epileptic with cerebral palsy. My mother had advanced Alzheimer's, getting worse every day, slowly. And my father, about 8 months previously, had had a massive stroke and was paralysed down one side of his body and couldn't talk. Now, you couldn't put that in a soap opera because the story editor would say, are you kidding me? His brother's like, and his mother's like, you can't give the father a massive stroke as well. It's just not realistic. So at that stage, I really was carrying the family. And I had been, in a sense, for a very long time. So I decided that, been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, time to move on. So out of that, I came to change my name to Renlexander. The story of that is something I can tell at another time when I talk about changing your name. Actually, this is interesting. When I went back to my brother and I told him about how I'd been named and I was changing the name, he said, you've got to give us time to adjust. He did have a job, by the way. He worked for the tax department. God bless him. Lovely guy in his own way, but massive anger issues that he inherited from my father. Anyway, so he was quite conscious of the fact that I had been earmarked to carry the family. And of course, I continued to support them. Of course, I didn't walk away or anything like that. I continued to support them until they died. My brother died during a seizure. My mother... Oh, it's okay, this is somewhat interesting. My mother fell over at the nursing home that she eventually went into, and when she could no longer remember where she lived, and she hit her head on a tree root, and my brother and I had already discussed this. They found out, oh, we can save her, we can do a brain operation, and and he said, as we'd agree, no, let her go. And so she died a few days later. My father, in a sense, committed self-euthanasia. He stopped taking his medication and for his heart. He was in a nursing home, and more like a hospital, really. And he eventually just faded away after about a week of not taking his heart medication. So after I'd made this big revelation about I'm not going to carry the family, about why I'd been named, that it wasn't an accident, that showed stuff that my father was going on in my father's subconscious that my mother then agreed to. Oh yes, carry the family, yes. The people who were doing the course started to tweak about those names. And one woman said, oh my God, I was called a loner because my parents wanted me to be alone. They were frightened of the influence that other children could have on me. And I have felt alone a lot in my life. So she moved on to another name. And Adrian went, oh my God, I was named Adrain because my parents were worried about me draining them and draining their finances. And I've often worried about people, draining me and this whole issue of being drained. And he changed his name to Adi, as in helpful, Adi. So then I started to realize certain truths, which is that we're not named by accident. That's not random. That the name shows something about what's going on inside the parent's subconscious. And after I had this epiphany from nowhere, I started to analyze names. I started to think about all names and how they associate with other words. How, for instance, if parents are worried that their child might defy them and stand up to them, and that they didn't want to have arguments and defiance from their boy child, they might call him Neil, as in Neil. So I started to work on this whole question of understanding names, and I came to think of it as name decoding, decoding and getting at the subconscious influences behind the selection of that name, what the subconscious, as it were, thoughts were behind the parental attraction to that name, and then how it came to then impact on the person. And I would have, this is actually interesting, this is fun, I was doing name decodings at this Mind, Body, Spirit festival, and I became more sophisticated, and I get them to fill in their name. You find the sheet here where you put in your parents' names and then your siblings' names and your name in order of birth, and I would do an analysis of name decoding and what their name meant and the trend of the names in the families, etc. And then the client, would take the name decoding off me. I said, would take the sheet off me, and I'd go, well, why do you want this sheet? It's too revealing, right? I said, all that there is a list of the names of your family. Yes, too revealing. So I hope you'll join me on this journey of discovering name decoding, understanding how it arises from the subconscious in English-speaking countries, and how you can benefit from knowing about the origin of your name, and perhaps move on to actually changing your name or whatever, and become more conscious of naming babies, right? So there's a course I've developed which is called How to Name Your Baby, so that parents can name their baby consciously instead of subconsciously.